So now that we've warmed you up with our fantastic keynote speakers and opening remarks, we've had some art performance, we're now going to get down to the business of the day, which is truly starting to frame the conversation around entrepreneurship globally. We have some dynamic panelists for you, and I'd like to welcome them to the stage for our first panel discussion titled Framing Entrepreneurship, the Past, the Present, and the Future. I'll welcome our first panel to the stage.
Good morning. I'm very happy to be here today and thrilled to be at the inaugural CMU Entrepreneurship Forum. Today's forum is all about global trends in entrepreneurship. We're going to start by giving you a macro view beyond Africa, beyond Rwanda, and really look globally at what's going on in entrepreneurship. We're going to be looking at what happened in the past, what we can learn from it, what's happening now, and what we see and trends that we see happening into the future. We're going to reflect on lessons learned, and we're going to be able to see what's happening throughout the world in starting and scaling companies. Of course, for me, this is an incredibly important topic, as I believe that the best way to create economic prosperity for all people is through ethical business. So let me first start by introducing our distinguished panel. We have Damien Stafford, who's political and economic chief at the US Embassy here in Kigali. We have Roland Price, who is country manager for Rwanda for the World Bank. We have Topsy Kola Oyaneyan, who is partner at McKinsey & Company. So before we jump in, I just want to get a sense of who's in the room and also wake us up a little bit. It's early. So I want to start by everybody just raising your hands like this. Everybody in the room, raise your hands up so we get used to raising our hands. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, you can put your hands down. First, if you live in Rwanda, raise your hand. Cool. If you live in Africa, not Rwanda, raise your hand. If you live outside of Africa, raise your hand. Cool. And if you've ever lived in more than one country, raise your hand. If you've lived in more than 4 countries, raise your hand. If you've lived in more than 10 countries, hey, awesome, baby. Okay, now because we're in CMU, raise your hand if you're a student. Lifelong student. Raise your hand if you work in the private sector, and for those who are in the private sector, that means you work for a company. Cool. If you work in the public sector or for government, if you work in academia or for an academic institution, if you work for a startup. Awesome. And if you're a founder, if you've ever founded a company. Cool. So we really want to be able to frame the conversation today about, one, who's in the room, and also it looks like most of us support entrepreneurs rather than are entrepreneurs ourselves. So for that, we want to really be able to frame the conversation about how can we take insights and ideas to be able to both start, scale, and accelerate the growth of entrepreneurship throughout the different communities that we work with. So just to get started, rather than me telling everybody about you, I'd love for you to tell everyone about you. And because this is all about entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship, I've asked for each panel to give a 1-minute pitch about how their background aligns with entrepreneurship. So Damien, I'm going to start with you.
Thanks, Lauren, and thank you to CMU Africa for the invitation to be here today. And it's an honor to serve on this panel with you, Lauren, and with my esteemed panelists, fellow panelists. I think I've always had an interest in entrepreneurship, and I hope you're not thinking like, good Lord, let's not start this whole thing. Let's not start the day with like a bureaucrat, like with government. But I've always had an interest in entrepreneurship, commerce, and trade ever since a young age. And I think in terms of my background, I guess I should put a pin in that my love affair with the continent started as a Peace Corps volunteer in Benin. And so in terms of entrepreneurship and talent, I was lucky enough to be a science teacher in northern Benin in a town called Jugu. I taught physics and chemistry. And so I was able to see firsthand the talent in Benin through my students. But I also saw future engineers, future programmers, future business owners. And so that connection between education and entrepreneurship was of great interest to me. After Peace Corps, I worked in New York City for 10 years, so I was a suit. I worked in IT management and consulting, partnered with IBM, Accenture, got to learn the tough lessons of New York City. But my curiosity brought me back to Africa and the Foreign Service. And so kind of marrying my experience as a teacher, but also working as an executive in New York City, I've been able to use that experience to kind of learn more about the world, but I've been lucky to see entrepreneurs working in Iraq, Vancouver, above the Arctic Circle, Somalia, and it's been a wonderful experience, and I've been lucky to have all these opportunities. In terms of entrepreneurship and my background, I do think that like entrepreneurship is a way to bolster economic growth, but not only economic growth, but inclusive economic growth now more than ever in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. Solutions will be local, and I think entrepreneurship and bolstering entrepreneurship is a way to highlight and underscore local solutions to local challenges. So I'll stop there, Lauren. Thanks.
Thanks. Roland?
Well, good morning, everybody. I think maybe the first thing I would say is that since I was 15 years old, I had an idea about the business that I was going to start. I won't tell you all what it is because I still haven't been able to manifest the idea, but it's coming. It's coming. Just wait. It is coming. And, you know, I'm very lucky. I have managed to start businesses. I realized I didn't put my hand up when you asked if I was an entrepreneur, but I sat and reflected and realized that I'm actually partners in a number of businesses, but generally I am led by more powerful, older, more thoughtful women than I am, my mother and my aunt. And I realized that my main challenge is that I'm not at the core a major risk taker. So I've had always a great deal of admiration for entrepreneurs, particularly young entrepreneurs, because I think it takes a kind of real steely, you know, something. I want to say cojones, but probably not the right environment for cojones, but it takes something special to be an entrepreneur, to be a successful entrepreneur, to be able to scale a business. And all the fancy stuff that Damien said at the end about boosting economic growth, that's the part that you would expect to hear from the World Bank. So maybe later in my comments, I'm going to say that, but I adopt those comments. Now my job allows me, and it's my job and my passion, allows me to work in this area. As the World Bank, we care, of course, about economic growth, inclusive economic growth. I think it's more of a surprise when I say we care about eliminating poverty and boosting the income growth of the bottom 40%. That is our mandate. And one of the things we realize is that in order to do that, we have to create jobs. And there are only so many jobs that are going to be created by large firms. That's generally what we've been talking about for a very, very long time. But particularly on the continent, we know that the magic is going to happen by tapping the innovation, the excitement, the passion of young people and older persons who decide to start businesses to bring solutions to the global stage. And I have the privilege of working at the bank where we care about these things, where we bring knowledge, we bring financing, we bring our convening power to try to address development challenges. Job creation and boosting entrepreneurship are some of the many issues that I deal with and tackle as part of the Rwanda country team at the World Bank. And so that's how they come to invite me to this auspicious stage this morning. I thank you, and I very much look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Topsy?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm very, very excited to be here. It's my first time in Rwanda. And I've heard so much about Rwanda, I've heard about the story, and being here makes it so real. I guess I'm an eternal optimist. I believe in the potential of Africa. And every time I see something that gives me hope, it encourages me, right? Coming in last night, just coming from the airport into the central business district, looking at the trees, looking at the cleanliness, looking at the order, I was just like, wow, you know, these things are possible. So anyway, I'm super, super excited about being here. So if you feel me, if I get too excited, you know why. Topsy Kola Oyene, I'm a partner at McKinsey. I lead our payments practice across the EMEA region. I am extremely passionate about business, and I know it sounds so boring, but from a young age, just like Rolanda, I've always been passionate about business because I felt that business actually is a key to drive change. And that's what led me into consulting. I thought, well, let me learn about different businesses, see how they're made, see how they function, and all the rest. And I've been in consulting for about 15 years or thereabouts. I've also had a career in industry. I've worked at a bank, an African bank across multiple countries in Africa. I've had a little bit of a stint with the regulator, with the Central Bank of Nigeria, looking at policies that impacted entrepreneurs, particularly entrepreneurs in the digital financial services space. And I've also been a failed entrepreneur. So this whole thing about risk taking, I've been there, done that, and failed. And then I decided to marry a serial entrepreneur. And thankfully, he's been more successful. So very excited about entrepreneurship and looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Terrific. Topsy, I'd love to actually start with you as we look at mega trends, right? Let's start with a global macro understanding of what's going on for entrepreneurs and what should we be aware of, both as entrepreneurs and those who support entrepreneurs, in terms of not only what's happening now, but what will be happening into the future.
Absolutely. So I think, one of the things that I've spent time looking at, post the pandemic is just sort of the parallels between sort of the Spanish flu pandemic and COVID-19. And I'm sure we've all read tons of things about it, the parallels and all the rest, right? But if you look at what happened, after the Spanish flu, right, it was the roaring 20s. Obviously, there was a recession very similar to what we have now, and then things just took off. Things blew up, and of course, later there was a depression. We won't go into that phase. But let's focus on what happened in the roaring 20s, right? Technology was at the center of it. Everyone's sort of familiar with the Ford T model, and then just how that drove consumption, innovation in manufacturing, and so on and so forth. And there was also a bunch of things happening around culture and all of that, right? Women were getting voting rights, the whole thing around that. When I look at where we are now, I think there are a number of trends that we need to sort of pay attention to in terms of what will create the next wave of opportunities. I actually believe that this decade is going to be very significant in terms of growth. And there are a couple of things, similar again to 1914. It's not so much that they're new things, it's just things that will get accelerated, and we're already seeing that. Digital in all its ramifications, whether it's big data, whether it's just artificial intelligence, whether it's, decentralized finance, everything around digital is major, right? And that is the trigger that's going to actually pull in a lot of these different innovations. Trade, I think, Damien had mentioned the importance of trade. Trade is big, especially in Africa, right? I mean, trade globally, we're looking at the new supply chain dynamics. People realize that, listen, if something happens, how exposed do I want my supply chain to be? We're actually still recovering from the impact of the pandemic on supply chains. But when I look at Africa and I look at the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, I think there's such huge opportunity, just exploring opportunities around trade and what that brings, because it's also backed by policy. So that's something I think entrepreneurs need to be very mindful around, and those that support entrepreneurs. Climate change is an area that I'm very excited about, right? And maybe not for the typical reasons. Obviously, we're all excited about the planet. We want the planet to, we need the planet, right? But beyond that, as someone who has a background in finance, I also understand how some of these sort of global agendas shape the world of finance and how people invest. I'm seeing it so clearly now. Everything you're looking for, raising money, your cost of capital, where capital goes to, is driven by the green agenda, by climate change. How sustainable is it and all the rest. So as an entrepreneur, that's something that you have to be very cognizant of, to say, listen, how does this fit in with climate change? How does this fit in with sustainability? And that sort of thing. And then maybe I'll just say one more so that we move on to other topics, is the future of work and remote working. It's probably one that I'm so passionate about. I've just seen it open up spaces and create opportunities. I talk to entrepreneurs now, some of whom are based in Nigeria, their developer is in Argentina, their customer support is in Kenya, there's someone else doing something for them in Estonia. I think it just creates a whole new world of both opportunities in terms of talent, but also opportunities in terms of trade, for entrepreneurs and businesses.
Thank you. And I think actually, Roland, as a counterpoint to somebody like McKinsey, right, who's looking from a much more private sector perspective, I would love to be able to understand what the World Bank's latest thinking is on entrepreneurship, and what are you learning globally?
Thank you so much. As you know, the bank does a lot. We're a bank, right? So it's in our name. Everybody focuses on the money. I think the thing that we do well is actually the analytical work that we do, the fact that we do the studies, diagnostic globally. And so there are lots of things I could tell you, but Lauren specifically told us that we need to keep it short and spicy. So, so I'll say only three things. The first is that there was always a strong focus on big firms and what big firms could do. And I think over the past 10 years, our operational teams, our impact evaluation teams have really come to understand and embrace the importance of small firms, startups, and the role that they can play. Small new firms tend to be more flexible, they tend to be more adaptable, they can weather economic storms more easily. They end up specializing in inputs and support activities that are very necessary for the larger value chains and are often feeding into those value chains. And so we care about them for job creation. We care about not just starting them, but we care about what is needed to have them grow. And that is most important. And it takes me to the next point, which is pitching the idea and getting the financing is the fancy part, right? That's the part that everybody's looking at, the flashing lights. So now you have the money, then what? Right? The reality is that we need a lot in terms, we have seen through our research that business development services really is a game changer for entrepreneurs. Business development services and managerial training. Because you had a great idea, you're a smart person and you want to take risk, but you don't necessarily have all of the elements that are needed to make that business a success or to scale that business. And so that is something that we recognize is central to the success. I think what is critical is that, because it's the bank, so we have to throw some numbers and statistics to make you all impressed, right? The impact, I shouldn't be making fun of my institution like this, but the impact on productivity and profits, we find manifests sooner once you have these business development services. There's a seminal piece of work which our development economist team have done in the textile industry in India. And we showed that that particular firm had double-digit productivity, right, in 18 months, relative to the control sample, based upon the fact that they were able to benefit from and take into account the comments and support that they receive through these business development services. So there's evidence that this works and it's much needed. I think the last piece that I would want to mention is gender. There is still globally a huge gender gap when it comes to entrepreneurship. We don't know exactly why that is. I mean, some things might be obvious, right? Women, maybe they're thinking, I'm gonna feed the family, I don't have the space to take as much risk, among other things. But this is still a place where if we are able, just like all other aspects of our economy, women are 50% of the population. If we're able to bring more women into entrepreneurship, I think we have a bigger opportunity to take the space and really to take this forward. Those are my three quick points.
Thank you. Now, Damien, you've worked with entrepreneurs in places as diverse as Iraq and Vancouver, Canada. What is one common thread that you've seen for what makes a great entrepreneur and entrepreneurship work in whatever market you've been in?
One thing that I've noticed in my travels is entrepreneurship hubs and tech centers and make spaces or maker spaces. There's one in Iraq in Baghdad called The Station. It's quite formidable, and that's where Iraqi entrepreneurs can go and work together. And I think, Roland, that might speak to the capacity bit of the problem set. Because Iraqi entrepreneurs could come together, and you're around the coffee table, but it's a very nice building, a very nice space. There's a coffee spot, and there's a woodworking spot, and there's a metal shop. So there's places where entrepreneurs can come together to learn about. They've got the bright idea, but they also need the capacity. I also saw that in Yukon, in northern Canada, where Indigenous entrepreneurs and locals would come together in a place called Uconstruct. And it's called the Northern Light Center. Also, it's very similar. It was very similar to Baghdad. I was like, wow, I'm in Canada now, and now I'm seeing another entrepreneurship hub, another tech hub, but also another makerspace. And so I saw some similarities there that helped with the capacity part of it. But working in these different countries, you see local, again, not going back to the local solutions, and the solutions will come from here to the challenges for here, the social environmental challenges, but also to make money. It'll come from here. And so, the solutions that I saw in Baghdad, there was, I actually went on the site last night and I noticed that one of the startups that we had, that was part of the station when we were there, was an app to go and do you need a new palm tree? Do you need palm tree health in your backyard? And within like a few months, they had like 50,000 users, and it was just a thing where there was a market opportunity there. In Canada, it's indigenous art is very beautiful, but indigenous entrepreneurs have found ways to leverage that to put indigenous art on coffee and sell it and market it. And so that's one aspect of that, or climate change. Indigenous entrepreneurs, they know the land in northern Canada, so they have the solutions, and so there's that aspect of it as well. There's a really neat story about a Somali entrepreneur who, a long time ago, we did a USAID did a Shark Tank type event in Minnesota, and a Somali entrepreneur said, "I like to sell chai tea. I want to put like a thing on my back and sell it in the streets where the cups come down." And he won, and he was able to have the money to get more backpacks, to hire more people to go out in the street to sell more tea. So I mean, my point is that from what I've noticed, there are a lot of ideas out there, and it's bolstering or supporting those local solutions to the local challenges and opportunities.
Now, switching a little bit in terms of ways to enable entrepreneurship now, Topsy, you're passionate about the combination of digital and African youth to transform our economic development. Why is this the nexus of your work? What is it about digital transformation in youth that makes it at the forefront of entrepreneurship?
Yeah. When I think about digital entrepreneurship and youth, right, I think the first thing I keep thinking about in terms of economic transformation for Africa is what are the opportunities for us to leapfrog, right? We're all familiar with the sort of mobile example, and it's still one of the best benchmarks of how we can leverage technology to skip sort of like years of development, and how our lack of infrastructure doesn't become a constraint, but actually a benefit, right? In Africa today, sort of mobile technology, mobile payments, and all the rest is the most developed anywhere in the world, right? Just because we didn't have the opportunity to develop that fixed infrastructure. Now, when I think about the opportunity for economic transformation, I strongly believe that digital will be at the center of that. Digital technologies is going to be at the center of that. And the youth, empowering the youth, is what's going to actually drive that digital technology to the forefront, right? And we're already seeing it, right? I know there's been a lot of talk around sort of the tech venture space in Africa, the amount of funding that's coming, which has been significant, but it's still relatively small compared to the potential. But it shows you that it's possible. And so for us, what I try to do, and even within McKinsey, what we're doing now is McKinsey is typically known for serving sort of large institutions and all the rest. But we have a practice that's focused on serving shape the shapers, which is like, what are the future companies? What are the future business builders of tomorrow? And when I think about the youth specifically, I feel that to empower the youth to take advantage of these technologies to transform our economies, three things are required. Character is required. Rolanda mentioned about the type of character that drives entrepreneurship, right? There's a lot around resilience that needs to be built. There's a lot around integrity and consistency. All that is part of how we can help empower these youth to take advantage. The other thing is skills, like real skills, technical skills, like actual core skills that are required, whether they're core skills like analytical or problem-solving skills, or just sort of like even emotional, how to collaborate, how to work with people. And then the third piece, I think, is understanding where we are, globally, understanding sort of the trends, understanding the season. And that's where organizations can sort of bring perspective, right? Bring that global perspective. What are the mega trends you need to be aware of? How does this impact your environment? And I think if we empower youth in those three dimensions, there's so much that we could take off on.
Thank you. And Roland, as an entrepreneur myself, I have to wonder, can the World Bank actually support scale entrepreneurs? we know you as a big development institution. Can development institutions actually work with entrepreneurs in a way that is productive for the markets that you're in?
Thank you, Lauren. And I almost see that as a bit of a challenge to us, right? And that's cool because we do well with challenges. I think it's a function of how you think about it, right? Now, are you thinking that we're going to go and sort of write a check, give the business development service ourselves, and try to nurture and provide the support that is needed for individual entrepreneurs? If that's what you're thinking, I don't think that that's our comparative advantage. I think that there are a number of things that the ecosystem that is needed, right? We need talent, as Topsy has mentioned, not just the individual person, but there are things that we can nurture and build, right? Their understanding, their resilience, their soft skills, right? So that's human capital development in a nutshell. They need money. We're big on money. I told you we're a bank, right? So the question is, how do we get those resources to them? And there are a number of different ways, right? It's supporting governments who have a number of funds. It's supporting the part of the bank that I sit in really interacts principally with governments. There's another part that deals with private sector, and it generally deals with large private sector. So on that side, on the private sector side, they're doing a lot with capacity building. And on our side, we're working a lot through governments to be able to provide these business development services, these specific funds for startups. Minister Paula was here. We have a digital operation with her that has a piece that really is looking at young entrepreneurs and how it is that we're going to be able to get capital to them. There are a number of really very good companies. She mentioned, for example, BPN. Through other arms of the projects that we're working with, BPN can also be supported, right? And other firms like that, not specifically BPN, but firms that are like that. So that's a very important piece as well, where the bank is not, and in much of what we do, it's not the World Bank giving a check, right? Because we work through governments. We are helping them to realize their goals, but we are able to design programs and policies, programs and projects with them to be able to get to where they need to get to. I think the third piece is the policy and the regulatory environment. And we're in the middle of that. That is stuff that we do really well, working upstream with governments to sort of create the ecosystem for these types of services. When you look at small businesses, a lot of people talk about taxation. They talk about, customs challenges. They talk about non-tariff barriers for importation and export. All of these are areas where the World Bank can work along with government to unlock the challenges and create the space for these businesses to grow. So, and frankly, we are doing that in Rwanda. I won't go into the details. You wanted short responses. But the fact is that in this program that I lead, there's so many different ways where that is actually being demonstrated. And worldwide, there are so many variations on those particular broad themes: talent, finance, policy, and the regulatory framework for investment, where I think that we are very large actors, though somewhat behind the scenes because we're constantly working through government.
That adds a lot of clarity. Thank you. Damien, you're a diplomat now, but you spent over 10 years in the private sector working in New York. What is the biggest lesson you learned during this time that you've been able to apply into your career supporting businesses around the world through the U.S. embassies?
Get up earlier than everyone else. It's true. If you get up early, really early in New York, you're ahead of the game. I would say get your pitch down in terms of, and Roland touched upon the sales and marketing bit of it earlier, but have the flashy part of it. But if you can't explain what you're doing in 30 seconds, then forget it. In New York, you just won't have. You won't have any more time or attention span from anybody. It's the elevator pitch. It's to say what you do very, very quickly, but succinctly and clearly. And that takes an element of understanding your business, understanding yourself, understanding your passion, and then formulating it in a way where you can grab somebody's attention and tell them what you do using words that they'll understand. If you're using words that they don't understand, again, forget about it. In New York City, time is money. It's all about networking. And so as you're meeting people, you want to use words that are globally recognized, that they'll understand, that they can latch on to, and then believe in what you're selling them in that 30 seconds. I'd say, in addition to networking, let me back up a second. Part of my job in New York City as vice president of operations for a firm was to hire talent. So, and I spoke at a few high schools, before joining the Foreign Service. And when I was telling the kids there, I said, if you want a job for $150,000, please go learn programming, and I can hire you, because I couldn't find enough programmers at a high level to fill my stable of consultants. So those skills, the hard skills, if you do start early, and if you want to program and you're interested in it, do it. There's a market for it. And I think, one could have success there. If you want to take that and leverage it into entrepreneurship or building your own business or branching out, then do that too. I don't think it's no secret that some of the most successful entrepreneurs of late started in the engineering, science, programming piece of it, but also used a network, of contacts to build out the framework of their company, legal, business development and whatnot. So having worked in New York City, I will say also that, I realized that I was touching on all these different countries and all these different spaces except my own, the United States. So I'm very proud of, I'm from upstate New York, so I'm from the mountains. I'm not a city slicker. So, however, New York City, in, let's see, around 2000 under Mayor Bloomberg, really did some innovative things with small business administration and small business startups, but being able to register a business in, I don't know, like 10 or 11 steps in a very limited time frame. Does that sound familiar? Right? So New York City was really ahead of the game on that front of supporting small businesses, but also, and I've noticed this in other countries, New York City and New York State had carve-outs for women and minority-owned businesses a long time ago in the early 90s. And I've noticed other countries haven't quite arrived there yet with procurement carve-outs, surprisingly. So that's another element of what I think New York City has done to help support that side of business. So I'll stop there.
Great. I would like to open it up if anyone has any questions. Of course, we can keep going, but just want to check in if there's any questions from the audience. Anyone have any insights they want to get into? Oh, Steve is here. Great. Steve, we would love to come invite you up. Welcome. So we are now joined by Steve Chumba, who is board member of AfriLabs and executive director of Active Spaces in Cameroon. Welcome. We're very happy to have you. It would be great if you could just open up by giving us a little bit. We've asked each of our panelists here to give a quick pitch on how your background aligns with entrepreneurship. Now, as an entrepreneur, that one's probably pretty straightforward for you, but it would be great to just get a little bit of a sense of who you are and what you do.
All right. Morning, everybody. Forgive my tardiness. I'm Steve Chumba from Cameroon. So I am the executive director of Active Spaces and a board member of AfriLabs. Active Spaces is one of the first tech hub on the continent. So we started operating about 2009, officially created 2010, and since then we've been supporting entrepreneurs. And AfriLabs, for those of you who know, is an organization, Pan-African organization of tech hubs. We're now present in about 52 countries with about 400 members, supporting over 1 million entrepreneurs. In terms of my personal background, thank you. In terms of my personal background, so I grew up in Birmingham, in a city in England. I actually started my first company around when I was about 16. It was art, using art for professional development. Interesting. I was a drummer. I'm still a drummer, I think. And that, so I had a very early artistic start to my career. And then I went to study politics and international relations. I don't know why. And then funny, went into education. So trained to be a teacher, and I was a teacher in the UK for a few years, and then decided to come back on the continent about 10 years ago, and to set up a school. So that was another business thing. We set up a British educational system in Cameroon. So I ran that for about a year or two. And then I kind of got the virus of supporting entrepreneurs and thought, okay, there are a lot of entrepreneurs in Cameroon in tech. And at the time, we had just started building what you call in Cameroon the Silicon Mountain community, which is a community of tech entrepreneurs around the Boya area, the English-speaking part of the country. And yeah, so we started supporting entrepreneurs. I started working and building a program for entrepreneurs. And I always thought that with my artistic background, and techies are somewhat artists as well in their own rights, educational background and my business background, I had kind of like the good mix really to hang around entrepreneurs. So basically, yeah, that's me in like 1 minute. So at Active Spaces, we really started with, and if you know Rebecca and Nanchong and a few people back then who were working in the tech industry, started thinking, okay, let's create a space. Originally, it was just create a space for techies to meet and just hang out, right? And then we started thinking, oh, there's more support needed. So instead of just having a space where there's internet connection, which, well, the connection wasn't that great back then anyways, we needed to start building other programs to better support entrepreneurs. So we started building a training program. Actually started with just putting meetups, organizing, inviting industry leaders to come and talk to young people, and then building incubation program, acceleration program. We started thinking, okay, we need more staff. So we started interacting with investors and said, well, we've got a lot of young people here that need investment. And so we started approaching, at the time we were talking to banks and everything. And I realized, oh no, these guys are not really the guys we need to be talking to. And a couple of years ago, we set up the Cameroonian Angels Network. It's another network to build in kind of like an investment community in Cameroon so that they can invest in some of the young people that we support. And then the work continued with working with government and trying to create policies around supporting entrepreneurs. So basically, yeah, that's what we've been doing for the past 10 years. Really.
Great. I'd love to know, you're a serial entrepreneur. How have you seen entrepreneurship change over the last decade?
So I think we're at the place again where it's actually changing, and I hope it does. So I think we've had a massive problem at the start, and I'm going to blame some of our maybe politicians here and say, I think at the beginning it was really a buzzword, like really a buzzword, like entrepreneurs, like yeah, you can't find a job, go be an entrepreneur, because and as much as I look back and I as much as I can criticize that and say, well, perhaps that was not the best approach, but I think we kind of needed that. We needed to find some kind of motivation and get out there and do things. And that was like maybe the excuse to build capacity. Somebody will come to us and say, oh, I've got this great idea, I want to do this, I want to do that. You say, yeah, great, get into our incubation program. And we're very excited about this, but this young person has no skills, no industry experience, no network, no money. I remember at some point we had a breakfast club, because I realized that some of the young people we're supporting so one of our hubs, we've got 3 hubs in Cameroon, and one of the hubs is in Douala. And it's quite central. So some of our entrepreneurs were coming miles away to get to the hub. And I kind of realized that these guys will probably have, I would say, franc CFA, but it's like $1 or maybe less than that in the morning. And they had to make the choice whether they take the taxi to come to the space or have breakfast or eat. So we started a breakfast club. I said, well, you know what? Use your money to come, so but you can have food here. So it was a lot, and it's still going on. And I think the way I want to look at it is say, instead of saying that it is changing, I think we're creating layers. We're creating layers of entrepreneurship. So those young people that come to Herbs and require skills, maybe with the excuse of entrepreneurship, it's useful. For the past, we were focusing a lot on that. But what I'm seeing is that we're starting, after doing that, we're starting focusing a lot as well on saying, okay, now perhaps we build some kind of capacity. Let's start building programs for mature entrepreneurs. So one of the things that we've started actually 2 years ago was saying, how do we now try and convince the guy or lady that has been working in a bank or whatever for 5-10 years and say, you know what, you've got industry knowledge. You've probably saved some money in your 5-10 years of experience, and you've probably made some contacts as well. Do you not have an idea that we can help you set up a business? So we're starting to create that second layer, and of course, what has happened on maybe a third and fourth layer is all the big guys you've heard about, the Flutterways or all of the big guys, and so what I'm thinking in terms of where we're going, and it's some of us can, and me, I've been thinking about, oh yeah, we need to focus more on the big guys and having more of the guys doing the big raise and everything. But I think we need to be able to kind of like provide services and support at every stage and every level of so this is where I hope we're going to. Yeah.
Thank you. So we're actually just coming to our time now. I'd love to just invite each of you to give me what's one thing that you're designing for in your institution tomorrow that you're doing today that others in our audience could be able to learn from. So perhaps, Damien, we could start with you. What's one thing that you're designing for tomorrow that you're currently focused on today that others in our audience would be able to learn from?
That's a tough question. From my perch at the United States State Department, I think there has been a recognition, and let me go back to my previous country, that for us, national security is economic security. And so you can take from that what you want. But I think that involves attention to trade and investment and entrepreneurship and commercial diplomacy, and a balanced approach with all the other pillars of engagement that we engage in throughout the world. I know locally, in talking with my USAID colleagues, I know they've done things to promote entrepreneurship and work in this space, which seems to be a bit of a shift in the past, I would say, 10 years or longer. So I know like our programming partners are adapting and recognizing that. And then, our public affairs shop, they're doing work with women entrepreneurs. So I'm a little bit subjective on it because my background is econ. Econ kind of like that's my discipline. So my political colleagues would have other views on this, but I think, and I guess it's one thing that I can do better to promote this within our organization. But I just have a strong belief that through inclusive economic growth and private sector development, I think that will solve some of the other more difficult challenges, difficult problems we have in the world. Again, I'm subjective because I love business and I love entrepreneurship. It's been a long, windy path to where I am today at the State Department, but those are my views. And so if I'm working in Somalia on private sector development, that's my passion. The same with Iraq, working on private sector development. I just had a strong belief that there was something there, and there is still something there. But the same can be said about trade and investment with our neighbor, Canada. And there's a lot there and there's a lot of challenges, but I think that pillar within the U.S. government, there has been a recognition there, but we chew gum and we walk at the same time. So that doesn't take away from any of our democracy, governance, and human rights focuses, or some of the security elements too. So just leave it there.
Roland?
Thank you. I was hoping that I could just say what he said, but he didn't make it that easy. So I think for us, the big challenges that are facing us as an institution, they're the ones that are facing the globe. But where if I had to come off the top of my head, it would be gender. Poverty continues, has gotten substantially worse over the pandemic and the recent crises that has resulted in this cost of living crisis that is affecting the globe. So poverty, gender, and climate are sort of the three big things on the horizon that as an institution we've always been managing, but I think has come very much to the forefront in terms of what it is that we're doing. And it's very interesting to me, Bemi mentioned that later today there are students currently working away in a hackathon trying to solve some of the largest development challenges. The suggestions that we had or the problems that we put to them were very much around these issues. We spend a lot of time as our institution trying to ensure that women can play a greater role in society, have more economic empowerment, because I think that's the part that we're good at. That comes through, owning businesses, running businesses, taking a greater role in private sector development and investment, and creating an environment that allows them to do that. Climate is not going away. As Topsy said, yeah, we need our planet for sure, right? We want to breathe. We want our kids to have some place to live. There are lots of different ways in which we can think about what sorts of solutions that we can put forward. And so our entrepreneurs who are listening, it's an area that I think is important for us to focus on. Poverty persists. And all of those three things, interestingly, intersect in many different parts of the world, right? The poorest people live along the coastlines. They are not, they're going to be washed away by storms. How are we going to be able to try to manage that? So I know that these are probably maybe bigger ticket items than you might have been thinking, Lauren. But for us as an institution, as the World Bank, those I think would be the three major cross-cutting issues that we care about, that we're dealing with, that we're trying to grapple with across the various work streams and sectors that we're dealing with. And it's very interesting. If I take it back to Rwanda, where we are, these are actually the three key cross-cutting areas in our strategy with Rwanda. How do we make growth more inclusive? How do we reach the poorest and most vulnerable? The country is fantastic and beautiful. The infrastructure is amazing, but it's still a very, very poor country. And how is it that in this very strong growth that the government has had, the country has experienced, how do we make sure that that growth is being felt by the persons at the bottom of the pyramid? Thank you. The same thing on women, right? Fantastic, how should I say, statistics around the number of women in parliament. You see incredible women leaders, Clara Kamanzi, Alice, who's here, who will be speaking later today, Minister Paul Ngabiri. But the reality is that when you move further down, lots of girls are still not having opportunities to work in STEM, to be in schools, to really have the same big dream or to pursue the big dreams that some of them are having despite the constraints that they face. How do we go about unlocking that for them? How do we go about giving them the space or the platform to really achieve those dreams? That's a critical piece of that. And then lastly, on climate, it's something that is front and center at the Rwanda's development strategy. For a country that, as I said, is low income, that might be surprising, but Rwanda has found the key and realized that particularly with the topography that it has, where soil erosion is a big issue, where they, confront drought and floods, they need to deal with this. We are very much, again, as the World Bank, looking at how to help with addressing these issues, because these three, I think, seem maybe to some as marginal, but for us are the center of the vortex in trying to have inclusive growth and boost the income growth of the bottom 40% for this country and for many of the countries in the African continent. Thank you.
Okay. I think for me, I'm a very big sports fan. It's one of the great analogies for business, I think. And maybe to answer that question, in ice hockey, one of the greatest players, Wayne Gretzky, was asked about, how have you managed to stay on top of your game for, so long and all the rest. And his response was, I always skate to where the puck is going, right? So I don't go to where the puck is, I go to where it's going, right? And I think that's the mindset in terms of this, right? What should we be doing today? In McKinsey, we've said, listen, a majority of our clients are like large institutions, the Fortune 100 and so on and so forth. But we have an active practice that's focused on supporting the shapers. We call it Shape the Shapers, which is basically saying what are going to be those new businesses, those new companies of the future, and how can we provide the support even from today to help shape that future. I was talking to an entrepreneur the other day who's into used car financing in Africa. And if you're familiar with the auto space in Africa, lots of used cars, not great for climate and all of that. And I'm like, well, that business today is good. Used car financing, old model cars is what the market can afford. But if you're not already thinking of how you can plan for EV vehicles, even in what you're doing today, then you're basically taking yourself out of business, right? So you're not exactly importing EV today, but you're planning for it, whether in terms of the network of infrastructure whereby batteries might be built or whatever policy actions. So I think in that same vein, when I think about what each of us could do, I would say for government, it's looking at some of these policies like Rolanda mentioned, and saying how do we position for the things that are coming, whether we think it affects us today or not, whether we think it's a big deal for us today or not, how can we position for it, how can we be the recipients for this move, or how can we sort of avoid sort of the risks that are going to come with this move. And I think it also applies in academia. How can we position students for where the market is going, what sort of courses, what sort of skill sets, what kind of relationships need to be built.
Thank you, Steve.
So perhaps at two levels. Let me start maybe at an AfriLabs level. One of the work that we've been doing is focusing a lot on policy. So we've created a kind of 10 policy pathways, and we're kind of working with governments and helping push for different startup acts in different countries. Recently talking to Algeria and some of the work that they've done there across the Startup Act. So we're kind of strongly pushing a policy at AfriLabs level. For me at Active Spaces, one of the things that we're kind of pushing is kind of regional integration, really. As you know, Central Africa, it's been kind of like lacking behind. And one of the things that we noticed is that entrepreneurs in the region are working somehow in, trying to solve similar problems in kind of almost similar environments. So what we've been trying to do is starting to push conversations around collaboration between the Central African countries. And as you know, we support a lot of tech entrepreneurs, and our individual markets are very small. So what we've been doing is kind of encouraging, partnership, collaboration, mergers and acquisitions amongst the different startups that we are supporting. I mean, and then the last thing I would say is investment. One of the things that we're trying to push for the future is, investing very early stage. A lot of these investment funds and whatever, I remember a couple of years ago, a fund came to us in Cameroon and like, yeah, we're looking for startups to invest. We've got like 1 million tickets that we want to put. I was like, where are you going with that? Like, who's going to be able to absorb that? So we're putting in place, and that is also actually reflected in AfriLab's policy roadmap, where there's a strong part on investment, and we're also focusing on, you call it early. It's not early stage, because what it means to the guys in America, early stage is quite different to what I understand. So maybe investing more on innovation, and somebody called it patience capital. So we're kind of those. So I would say those three things. Investment very early stage, policy, and regional integrations. Those would be the things that we would be focusing on.
Thank you so much to this wonderful panel. I really appreciate all of the insights and really deep thoughts that you've been able to provide for us. Thank you to CMU. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day with the Entrepreneurship Forum. And thank you so much to Baby. Yeah.